inventing amazing technologies, but when it came to the maglev train thing, it's like we love our cars too much, which makes absolutely no sense. And then you have the maglev vacuum tube train. And I'll go into a little more detail about that. It's a supersonic train. This would be over 400-mile range, because if it was any shorter, the accelerations to get up to speed and go back down would probably give you a big headache. So it's a train that can go 2,000 miles an hour, 2,000 plus miles an hour, roughly 3,218 kilometers an hour. Non-stop from Berlin to Madrid would be about an hour. Right now it's 3 hours by plane that pollute much more. This is a real technological advancement that exists in model and in theory, and could exist because the analysis has already been done. There's a Popular Mechanics article in the handout, or if you have the USB drive, it's in my report that I provided for this, that talks about exactly how that system would work. And there's an entire system, and you can even do it underwater. You can have it go intercontinental, and it would be basically a floating, there's where the shape memory alloys would kind of come into play, so that if things bent or moved, it can move with it. And it's a floating train anyway, so you're not directly connected to the track. So even if the track did shift a little, that's not going to make a lot of difference to the train as it goes by, because you're not touching the track. The speeds are amazing, the comfort. You imagine a 500-person train instead of a 500-person cattle car aircraft, where the train you actually had a room with a bed, and you were able to, if you wanted to sleep, even though your travel times would be really short, you still could sleep, or at least relax, on this jaunt from New York to LA in an hour and a half or two, something like that. Yeah.
Is it much more sustainable than the trains which you have now? Because if we change from train system we have now in Europe to this, there's a lot of energy needs to build an infrastructure.
Right.
There's a lot of investment of energy.
Right, to go into it. Now think about long term. You've got initial investment of energy to convert everything. All of these systems could be solar wind powered. So they would have the track, along the line of the track would have its solar wind powered stations. In the long run, these systems would last 50, 60, 70. I mean, right now you've got to expend energy anyway to maintain the trains that you've got, to maintain the tracks that you've got. If you were to switch it over, that maintenance actually drastically drops. And it's a more sustainable, long-lasting technology. So in the long run, over the long term, the energy investment would be less, because eventually it powers itself. And you don't have to put anything into it because it's a clean energy powered system. So you don't, after you build it once, you're effectively done until it comes to like small maintenance and things of that nature.
Does it have any effect on the climate? Have any effect on it? Say you're in a cold country or what?
As far as expanding and contracting of the tracks or things of that nature? No, because it's in a vacuum tube, it's actually completely isolated from the environment. So the tube would be however X meters thick, and it would be an insulated environment. So no matter what's going on outside, that train always experiences the same low vacuum level. Now I'm not talking about a hard vacuum like space, just enough of a vacuum to where you can achieve those speeds without creating so much friction on the skin of the train where it heats up like space shuttle reentry or something like that. We don't have to worry about putting heat shields or anything on the system, but you want to get as many air molecules out of the way as possible, or gone, so that the train can achieve those speeds using as little energy as possible. And the analysis would be done to make that happen. Yes?
For example, we were just saying about the energy that would, and the cost to move from the standard train usage to maglev into the vacuum tube. Japan is the country who came with the maglev, which is in place now, and they're choosing not to change to maglev because they have already put the whole Shinkansen system throughout Japan, and the cost to put the maglev now would be too great. That's what they say. So they have the system, but what they're doing, they're only selling to other countries instead of using themselves.
Right, and it's a cost issue, so we're back to finance again. So notice how we always go back to cost? We're not talking about capability, we're not talking about resource availability, we're not talking about knowledge and human ability and ingenuity. We always come back to cost. That should be a red flag in your head.
Not only, but big systems real won't break down, even if they're automatic.
True.
And I worked, for example, during my studies in vacuum tubes for semiconductor physics, and it needs a lot of energy and a lot of hassle to keep a tube, for example, from Berlin to Madrid empty. What is the global energy balance?
Well, to be honest, that would have to be analyzed. I can't give you the answer. I don't know. But whatever.
Just wondering whether you.
No, you don't know that.
Rough figure.
No, I don't give rough figures. I only give the facts that I know. I'm okay with saying I don't know.
Okay.
I'm humble enough to know that I don't know everything. I'm just giving you something to think about.
Neither do I.
And so, you know, but the maglev tube train is a viable technology that does need further research. It got to a point, but then like, oh, it's going to cost $1 trillion to do, so they put that on the back burner. Well, if money was no object, you could have the scientists and research team really develop and solve those problems, overcome those challenges, figure out, well, maybe we need to put vacuum pumping stations every mile, small ones, so that they all work together, and they'll have their own solar power facility or wind power facility, so that they can run themselves. They're all independent of each other. So there are ways to overcome those challenges if we actually put the brain power to it.
If we didn't have to spend all that money on weapons and
Right.
arms trades.
Yeah. If you didn't waste so much resources on missiles, tanks, bombs, and guns, and actually put it towards this, it'd be amazing what we could do. I do have links for every single one of these technologies in the handout, so you can actually go and see how these work, what it's all about, all these transportation systems.
You have them on the internet also, this?
I could probably post the report online. I'm sure I can get it on the Venus Project website at some point. I really didn't think about that. Communication. We all pretty much know how this one works. We use it all the time nowadays. I mean, you got your satellite communication, your smartphones, and your internet. And that happens to be a system that we have adopted in abundance in a way. The only problem is third world nations don't really have it. Not as much as I would like for them to be able to communicate. So after the abundant solution sets are implemented, what are you left with? Sound mind, social state. So personal purpose. Given that one is no longer restricted by lack of educational opportunity, in other words, oh, I can't afford to go to school to be this whatever I want to be, and it's no longer a roadblock. They are free to learn and pursue whatever passions they like. You literally be whatever you want to be when you grow up. There's no restriction that says, well, I want to do this, but that's not going to help me live, so I'm going to do this instead, and treat that as a hobby. You make your passion and your hobby what you do for a living. And as you grow and learn and change, if you want to change your hobby and do something else, then do something else. There's no financial ramification, no negative aspect to changing your mind and doing something different that you would still find appealing. And since their living conditions are no longer based on what they do for work, you're no longer defined by your job, how you live by your job, they are considerably more stress-free and strong with a sense of purpose and self-fulfillment. Anybody who would disagree with that? There are social studies that have basically proven this case, that if you better the environment, you better the people. They become healthier, they become more alert, they enjoy life a lot more, they laugh, you have more free time to hang out with your family. Yes?
What about depressions?
Depressions?
Yeah, people in wealthy countries get more frequently depressive than in poor countries, for example, or commit more often suicide.
Right.
Obesity.
Or obesity.
Yeah.
You know, I think those would drift away as well. I mean, if what are those in current society? What are those stresses driven by? You know, keeping up with the Joneses, making sure that you've got your business running, all the stresses of managing the finances, keeping the competition at bay. Instead of collaborating and working together to make the best possible product you can, you're competing against each other and hoarding resources and putting up walls. So that's a mental stress of constantly having to defend.
It's not the only reason. I mean, if
There are
everything
many.
is going well, maybe I feel useless in this life and I get depressed and then maybe commit suicide.
Well-
If there's not many relations between human beings, as you already said.
Right.
For example, education is going to be over internet, so there are no people I can talk to, I can touch, or I can just, no one who can hug me.
Well, there would
I
be
would
your
feel
local
alone.
community. You would still have your local community, which would be more tight-knit because now everybody doesn't have to work 40 to 50 hours a week. They can be together more often as a family unit, as a community unit. And the education over the internet thing, I don't want you to think that that would be the only way. That would be an option until you can get people there. I'm just saying that an educational opportunity through the internet is an option for people who don't have access to a real teacher yet. And hopefully you'd be able to work it to get somebody there for that live physical interaction. Because I've taken online courses and live courses, and there is a huge difference between the two, especially when you're going through an engineering curriculum. And so I prefer live because you can, interact directly with the teacher and whatnot. But the internet at least is an option in the meantime. It's a stopgap so that they don't just sit there doing nothing. They at least get some kind of system. So as far as depression, sometimes there are just chemical imbalances you can't predict, you can't deal with. This isn't a utopian construct. What this is saying is we have developed technologies to make life better, but there's no such thing as perfect. I hate that word utopia, especially because a lot of people use it as an attack word. You're talking utopia. Well, first of all, what's wrong with utopia anyway? Wouldn't that be nice? But even though it's impractical, to understand the only constant in the universe is change. Things are always changing. We're always growing, developing, learning new things, coming up with different ideas and better ways to conduct life and ourselves. So what matters is the toolbox that you have. Do you have a toolbox that restricts you and not allow you to grow and develop? Or do you have a toolbox that allows you and actually encourages you to grow and develop and deal with those problems? Can you handle everything? No. Even if you lived in a city where all of this was available, there still might be a few people who would just snap and kill someone. Why? Probably chemical reasons, because you know it's not environmental reasons. Nowadays, we don't know if a person is messed up in the head because they're chemically imbalanced. Are they messed up in the head because something happened to them as a kid, their environment was bad, or they're living now in a bad environment? Or is it a combination of the two? The bad environment gave them a chemical imbalance? So there's too many variables in that. If you at least better the environment as well as you can, you've at least reduced that variable almost to a negligible point. So now the odds are if somebody does snap and do something wrong, that's because they were genuinely chemically imbalanced. And hopefully there will be signs and ways to notice those and get them to doctors to help them, which we don't really do now. People who are mentally sick, we throw them in prison, don't do anything with them, don't try to rehabilitate them or figure out what was the biological reason that they behaved that way. Although most crimes are economic, not anything else. In fact, about 85% of the people that are in prison are in there for an economic-related crime, theft, burglary, things of that nature.
But I think they do that. I mean, my father was a psychiatrist in Berlin Hospital, and he has been dealing with what you're mentioning ever since the 60s. So they are dealing with such problems. Even those in prison, they have psychiatrists to talk to them and understand what is their problem.
Would you say that most of the prisons do, or just a few?
No, I think it wasn't a few.
Okay.
By the way, the nature sometimes it has an impact on the biological issues. Like those people who doesn't have much light, especially on the northern areas, they get depressed, and maybe the ratio of the maximum number of those who commit suicide comes from these environments. So, yeah.
I agree with that. In fact, one of the things that Heather mentioned earlier was sunlight and stuff like that, and how that can affect personality.
Other thing, the relation with nature, even with water, with rocks, because sometimes we see strong people, those who are always, every day, they go outside and they walk and they swim and they go climbing mountains, things like that, in addition to their life problems.
Absolutely, and in a system where abundance exists, and you have more free time, you could go hiking